Adkins with the Adkins Family Law. I'm a family law attorney. I've been practicing here in South Florida for about 17 years now. And so I just want to give you guys some ideas. I've been gathering some questions from some of my followers on Instagram and Twitter. And so I just want to take a few minutes with you guys to go through some of those questions that are commonly asked by a lot of my users and my followers. So hopefully you'll get a little nugget out of this, but I'm going to go through some of these questions that were previously submitted. And if you weren't one of those people that previously, listen to me, but if you're not, if you want to submit a question, please check out my Instagram and my Facebook and my social media channels so that you can submit a question, because we're doing these Q&A sessions regular. So if you didn't get your question answered today, please be sure and click on a link below and check me out on my social media channels, and then submit your question, and I'll make sure that we get you answered on live, because there's a really, really good chance that if you have the question, probably somebody else does too. It's rare that I get a question that, you know, after practicing for so many years, it's rare that I get a question that I haven't been asked. So if you have a question and it hasn't been asked, then click on the links below and get that submitted, and I'll make sure we get the questions answered for you. That's what we're trying to do today. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go through some of these questions that have been submitted. So the first one that I have that was submitted is, if one parent is neglecting to enroll your child into school and you have 50-50, what do you do? So it really comes under the umbrella of shared parental responsibility. And under Florida law, the two parents are supposed to make decisions together regarding school. And it's been a little bit of a hot button lately because of COVID and everything that we've had going on. You know, if it isn't COVID and it's, you know, the school shootings that we've been going through. So there really is a lot of conflict in this area with the parents. And should I send my kid to school, or maybe I should homeschool them, you know? And I think maybe that's the bigger issue. So you have to look at why one parent doesn't want to send your kid to school, and what are the options if they're not going to school. There's actually a virtual solution here where they can go to school online. So they can be homeschooled, they can go to school online, they can go to school in person, and you have to look at, and then here's the bigger thing then too, is having the conversation with the other parents and listen, I want Mary to be in school, or I want Mary to be homeschooled. You guys have to have a conversation about that and talk about the pros and cons and why one wants homeschooling and the other one wants schooling in person, because there's great things about both situations. And the most important thing is that you guys are on the same page about school and who's doing what. So if you're having the conversation and you're talking about the pros and cons of both options and you're still having a problem, then it may be appropriate to file something in court in terms of whether the two of you agree. But if you're going to be successful in court, it really has to be someone behaving in bad faith, that they're just sort of putting their foot down or digging their heels into the ground and saying no. You know, if it's some sort of a tantrum where they're just like, no, I don't want to do what you want to do, and it's for some nefarious reason that, you know, you don't know, but it's not a legitimate objective reason about why they want to do something different from you, then maybe that's an option for you. But I think that's where I would start, is open up the conversation or open up the dialogue with the other parent and really ask questions, and then figure out what you're going to do if the two of you still have different solution ideas about whether your child goes to school, goes to virtual, does a little homeschooling, etc. So anyway, that's one question that came in, and it comes up a lot. And then another question that we have too. So this is, I don't know what's going on. Maybe there's something in the water, maybe there's a full moon, but I usually get my questions in a stream where a lot of people kind of ask the same question, and this is one of those, and then they'll go away for a little while. So I'm not sure what's going on out there with you guys, but it talks about, if a parent doesn't have contact with your kid, when can you terminate their rights? So it's always a little interesting that you want to terminate the rights of the parent, and there's a lot of reasons why you would do that are legitimate. And I would say that in terms of a time frame, if there's no contact with the other parent, In the state of Florida, we're usually looking at like a minimum of 2 years with no contact from the other parent. So if you've had no contact from the other parent for at least 2 years, then you can at least start exploring the idea of terminating the other parent's rights. And there's a lot of repercussions that come with that. So if you're thinking about terminating the other parent's rights, then be thoughtful in your process, because judges don't like to do it, number one, because you're effectively, I hate to say it, but you're bastardizing your child by terminating one parent's rights. So if you're going to be successful with that, then you probably want to have some other person who steps into that role so that the child always has two parents, no matter what, whether it's the birth parents, whether it's a parent that steps in the role. Like sometimes I'll do a step parent adoption. If there's a parent that's active and a parent that hasn't had any contact for at least 2 years, then one of the suggestions I would make is doing a step parent adoption, where you could terminate the rights of the first parent that doesn't have any contact. And then what you would do is go ahead and make the argument. And of course, there's a lot of variables on this too, but I think at least for the purposes of doing the Q&A today, is if you're going to try and terminate the rights of one parent, is to have another parent step in. I would encourage you to have someone else ready to go that wants to pick up the obligations, because some of the things that are affected are the inheritance. Things that are affected include the child support, and certainly time sharing and other obligations that come with raising the child. So if you're the active parent, you know what those are. It's an everyday struggle. I get it. And so if you have a legitimate reason as to why you want to try to move forward with terminating the rights of the other parent, try to have a plan in place and try to have some ideas about why you're doing what you're doing and being thoughtful in your process. And then there's certain limited ways that you could actually do that, if that's the way that you want to go. All right, so here's another question that, it's kind of tandem a little bit. So the question that came in from my listener is, my wife and I are separated for 3 years. Can I stop paying voluntarily child support because she won't sign the papers? So I suppose you could, but I'm always going to tell you and everybody else that if you're obligated to pay child support, you got to pay your child support. If you're trying to get somebody's attention, then sometimes the money is a way to do it. But I can never say to you, hey, don't pay your child support. That'll get them to the table, because they're independent of one another. And then it also starts to look like coercion or duress or some of those others, some of those intimidating methods that might be used to get somebody to sign something. So, let's look at the other side of the coin and you stop paying child support, and then they sign the agreement. And then what happens when they sign the agreement and then you go back to paying your child support and they go, oh, I signed this agreement because they forced me to, because I was under duress, because I was being coerced, that if I couldn't sign this agreement, they weren't going to give me my money, and I need diapers, I needed food. I mean, all that stuff that your kids need, to cover the rent and the utilities and all those things. God, it's super expensive to raise the kids. So I don't know if child support's the way to go as far as withholding that if you want somebody to sign papers. It may be useful to negotiate some things, but I wouldn't just stop paying the child support as a means of getting somebody to sign the agreement. I think it's helpful to get their attention. And I think once you have your attention, you can negotiate the agreement. And if you're still having problems with that, then maybe you have to get a professional involved, whether it's a mediator or an attorney, or even a third party or a family member or somebody who could just facilitate that process for you. That might be a better way to go rather than withholding the child support. And I'm not even sure how much we're even talking about. So I would suggest you keep paying your child support and see if you can't get some third party intermediary to come in and get the two of you to the table to talk about whatever the settlement or the papers are that you want them to sign. I mean, you've already been separated for 3 years, so some of that emotional volatility should be to the wayside. But if it's not, then maybe you get a third party involved to negotiate the agreement where they're not so emotionally involved. at least if you're still in that situation. So, okay, so here's another question from one of my followers. And this question came in and they asked, in Florida, if I buy a car with inheritance money that I received while I was married, will the car get split 50-50 once I divorce? So two things going on there in that question. The first part is, when you have an inheritance, it's usually non-marital, and it should stay non-marital as long as it's an inheritance and you keep it separate and you don't do what's called commingling, where you move that inheritance into a marital account or a marital asset. When you start mixing stuff together, it blends and turns into marital. But if you keep your inheritance separate, then it should be able to stay in the non-marital box, if you will. And if you buy the car with non-marital money and you keep the car as a non-marital possession, then it should stay non-marital. It shouldn't be split 50-50, but there's a lot of things that go into what happens with the car that might make it marital. So you've got to really focus on the characterization of the property, because if this is a car and you buy it outright with that inheritance that you got, then that's one thing. So what happens when you buy the insurance policy to cover the car? What happens when you have to make a repair to the car? What happens when you're putting gas in it every month? What happens when you're doing the maintenance with the tires and the oil change and all those things that come with owning the car? And that is going to come out of marital money or marital assets. And then you start having this problem of blending this, what started out as a non-marital asset, and turning that into a marital asset. So you have to be careful, because the same is true with a house, where if you come into an inheritance and then you buy like a cute little small house off to the side, and then you're paying the electric and you're paying utilities and you're paying for the repairs for the air conditioner and you're paying the repairs for all these things that come with the house. What if you guys have a housekeeper? What if you guys have a upgrade, or you guys redo the bathroom, or you redo the kitchen? There's a lot of things that come into play that take a non-marital property and turn it into marital property. So you have to be super careful with that and make sure that you keep everything separate if you want to keep your non-marital property non-marital, and then assume that you're going through the divorce, just so that you don't turn it into a 50-50 proposition, because it's not tough to do. I think it's tougher to keep it non-marital than it is to try to split it up once it's marital. That's usually what happens, but it can be done. So if you're going to do that, make sure you keep everything separate as much as possible, not only in the accounts, but also in the paper trail through statements and things of that nature, and the way that you conduct the transactions. Okay, so that I think is that question. And then, so so this is kind of a blended thing. The question here is, how can I get my house in the divorce if you make the down payment? So the issue is, where did the down payment come from? Because if the down payment came from money that wasn't marital, then you could certainly make a claim to do unequal distribution if you wanted to, based on the fact that you use non-marital money to do the down payment. You could try to do it that way. And then if you use, it really is about where the down payment came from, because if the down payment came from your stuff, and it was already, you guys were already married, then, it's going to be marital. So, let's see, the mortgage is in both. Yeah, it's not so much the mortgage. If the mortgage is in both names, it's almost like the down payment is an asset, or, that way. And then if you are looking at the mortgage is a liability. So you have to split up the asset 50-50, and then you have to split up the liability 50-50. So you could potentially keep the asset as non-marital and then have the liability as marital. And that might be the way to go on that particular question, as far as being able to split things up. But it's going to be an unequal distribution at the end of the day, and you have to file a motion to get that. You can't just expect that you're going to get it. So That's another variation on the other question that was asked. So anyway, listen, I got a bunch more questions here, but I'm actually out of time for this live Q&A. So we're going to be doing these again. We do these pretty regular. So if you didn't get your question answered today, then please hook up on my channels, hook up on my social media and my links below. Submit your question. I'd love to get that answered for you, because you guys are in a much better position to make a decision when it's educated instead of just random guessing. So submit your questions. I'd love to get those answered for you on my next run. And until then, I'll see you guys later on. Hope you all are staying safe and dry.